In this video, what we're going to do is we're just going to look at how to do a lot of the SOL with only your calculator, just in case you feel stuck on a problem. There's lots of good tricks that we can use. So the first thing I want to make sure we're all on board with is after your calculator gets cleared, we're going to want to go ahead and change this to A plus BI mode. So you would just go to mode, and when you reset a calculator, what it does is it resets this whole column back to the left side. So what we want to do is we want to change it from real to move it to this A plus BI mode. This won't mess up any part of the exam. It just helps us on certain questions. So we're going to go ahead and make sure we change our mode on the morning of the test after your calculator was cleared. And then the second, you're going to get these two sample questions. So it's always nice to feel a little bit confident when you go to answer your sample. So if we go ahead, and I'm just going to do these because I'm going to show you the calculator tricks in a second. But if I have a square root of 7x over a square root of 16, remember we're allowed to break up multiplication and division under radicals. So this is going to be a square root of 7x, and the square root of 16 is 4. So we would say a square root of 7x over a 4, and there's nothing I can do to simplify a 7, so it has to stay under the radical. There's nothing I can do with the x, so it has to also stay under the radical. So when you start your SOL and you have your first sample question, we're going to be sure of ourselves that this is the correct answer to the sample. Remember, on your test, you are also going to have to answer some that you have to write a number in. So if I started to solve this for x, the first thing I would want to do is let's add the 3 to the other side. So I'd have a square root of x equals a 9. And so to get rid of a square root, we have to use its inverse, which is squaring. So I would say x is 81. So in this problem here, you would actually type in the number 81. All right? And we don't type in any x's or anything else. We just type in the value of x. And so when we take our samples, we now are comfortable with our answers. So let's go ahead and start looking at some calculator things. So the first thing I want you guys to remember when you are taking your SOL is you have the I on your calculator. So if I look here, second decimal gives me an I. So anytime I see these, I'm just going to type out that entire thing exactly how I see it with the parentheses. All right. And I'm just going to make, all right, plus 5i. And then minus 11 plus 13i. And as long as you're careful with your parentheses, we're done. A negative 17 minus 9i, and that's our answer right here, which is the first one. All right. Now, if I go ahead and I use that same idea to put I-75 in our calculator, so in I-75, we would have this. Now, remember, your calculator does this really strange thing where instead of just saying 0, it sometimes writes out these weird numbers. Well, remember what this means. This means a 2.5 times 10 to the negative 12. Well, that is a 0. And so you really have a 0 minus I. So that's kind of a confusing way to see that it's a negative I. But let's also remember our calculator. If I go to math and over to number, let's use I part, that third option where you can see I part, and we're going to put in I raised to the 75. Oops, and let's go ahead and I'm going to fix that. And we get a negative I. And that's a much easier way to look at that problem. I think you guys would agree. So if you remember that you have the I part button, which is in math, we go to math, over to number, and it's option 3. then it just kind of simplifies it for you. All right, other important things I want you to remember, if we go ahead and we look at this part, square root and cube root are different things, correct? So on your calculator, it gives you a nice convenient square root button, right? The square root button is there for you, ready to use. So if I wanted to say a square root of 48, that's fine. But the cube root, a 2, and for cube root we have to go math, and it's this fourth option of 10. And so if I had to subtract those two, we could type it all out in one line, but you just have to be really careful that you don't confuse the square root with a cube root. So square root of 48, and then minus 2 math, the fourth option, cube root of 10. And when you hit enter there, that would have been your answer. All right. Now, the other thing you might have to end up putting in your calculator when you're taking your test, maybe they're going to ask you to put in a fourth root. All right. So anything beyond a third root, so let's say I wanted you to tell me what the fourth root of, and let's just put in a random number there, 81 is. We're going to go to that same spot, math, but now look at the fifth option. The fifth option is the one that gives you this. Now, my issue is it pulls down whatever the last thing was. So you have to fix that. So you have to tell your calculator, I want that to be a 4, and then you put in your 81. All right? When you get used to it, you might remember, hit the 4 first, go to math, 5, and see then it automatically takes it into the index and makes it the fourth root of 81. All right, so that's your strategies for radicals. All right, when we go ahead and I want to go through a couple more of just number sense type things. If I said 81 raised to the 3/4 minus a 9 to the 1/2, in your calculator, if I want to put in those fraction exponents, we're going to hit 81. I'm going to use the arrow button, and then you can just type these in exactly how you read them. All right? And then caret 1/2. And that's done. Okay? So that's putting fraction exponents. You shouldn't change anything when you're putting in a fraction exponent. All right? And then if we go ahead and just look at our graphing. So something we have discussed in class, but I want to talk about one more time. Anytime you're graphing anything with a fraction, I want you guys using this alpha y equals button. So alpha y equals, and we're going to put in 2 divided by an x minus 3, and then a plus 4. So if I go ahead and I hit graph, we're going to see that nice function there. All right. Now, a common question we hear when it's about rational functions is the idea of where the asymptotes would be. So if I'm looking at this graph right here, I can see a horizontal asymptote and I see a vertical asymptote. Now, vertical asymptotes are where we get our domain restrictions. So you can go to your table, and a lot of times your table is going to help you come up with your domain restriction. So at 3 is a value that would not be included in the domain for this function. And the last number sense thing I want to go over with you is just to remember where you get your log base. All right. So our log base is, you can't use this log button for a log base. All right. So let me come back out to this screen. This log button, if you hopefully remember, means log base 10. This is a log base 3. So what we're going to do is, remember, you've got all of these nice little things hiding up here. If you hit alpha y equals, you can type in a fraction. If you hit alpha window, it gives you your absolute value, which is very helpful. It gives us our sigma, which is very helpful. And then the fifth option is your log base. So if I go ahead and I'm going to do the fifth one, remember this is where you can see nicely log base 3 of 54, and you can get a nice value for your log graph. All right, so I'm going to stop this video here. This just goes over some of the number sense things that you might need reminders for. The next videos are going to go over some of our solving techniques and our simplifying techniques.